Hi, my name is Brian Venton and welcome to another Words of Hope Pastoral Conversation. This is an Easter conversation that I've called What Gets You All Fired Up, and it's drawn from Luke's Gospel 24. It is of course part of the Easter timeline, and in particular this event occurs in the hours immediately following the resurrection of Jesus and is commonly referred to as the road to Emmaus. I've taken some liberties here and paraphrased the story for us. The same day Jesus rose from the dead, two travellers were heading home to Emmaus, approximately 12 kilometres from Jerusalem, and they were talking with one another about recent happenings. And as they talked, Jesus, whom they didn't recognise, came up and walked along with them. And he asked them, "What are you chatting about, fellas?" They stood still and looked at the other traveller with their faces downcast, and one of them, named Cleopas, quipped a little incredulously, "What tree have you been sleeping under, mate? Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know what's been happening there?" "What things?" the other traveller asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people, and the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What's more, it's now the third day since all this happened. In addition, some of our women folk amazed us. And they went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body, and they came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. And some of our mates also went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. Jesus wasn't anywhere to be found." And the other traveller said to them, "Come on, guys. Are you that thick that you don't understand what the old prophets have been saying all these years? Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. And as they were nearing Emmaus, Jesus acted as if he was going to continue on his journey. But they urged him strongly, saying, 'Hey mate, why don't you hang out with us for a while? It's nearly dark and we'll talk more over dinner together.' So he went in to stay with them. And as they were eating and chatting, Jesus took bread and he gave thanks and he broke it and began to give it to them. And at that point, their eyes were opened and they recognised who this other traveller was. And then he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and he opened the scriptures to us?' So they got up and hurried back through the night, the 12 kilometres to Jerusalem, where they found all the disciples and a mob of other people and said, 'It's true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon and myself.' Then the travellers relayed everything that had happened. But it was that statement that got me thinking. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? And it made me ask the question, what is it that kindles a flame in our hearts? What gets us burning for all the right kind of reasons? I want to draw your attention to 3 lessons from this historical record. First, shattered dreams are not necessarily final. The text tells us that the travellers were downcast. They were trying to make sense of why Jesus died and the reports that his tomb was now empty. There's nothing wrong with being sad or downhearted, nor even depressed for that matter, as long as we guard ourselves against getting stuck in a spiral of negativity and gloom. Reflection is a good thing. It's how we begin to process stuff, to ponder the meaning of our circumstance and ask the important why questions of life. C.H. Spurgeon on this passage says, "It's good to let sorrow have a tongue where sympathy has an ear." He says, "Allow those who are seeking the Lord to tell you their difficulties. Do not discourse much with them until they have done so, and you'll be the better able to deal with them, and they will be better prepared to receive your words of cheer." He says, "Often by facing the disease of sorrow, the cure is half effected, for many doubts and fears vanish when they are described." But talking out our troubles is not always enough. We generally need inputs to break the cycles of despair and discouragement, which leads me to the second lesson from this text. Good inputs make for good decision making. From a secular perspective, one author puts it this way. He says, wrong assumptions lead to bad decisions, poor planning and unwanted outcomes. Assumptions, though, are often necessary for decision making, but we need to avoid wrong suppositions if we want to make the right choices. Now, there's a lot of truth in that statement. As a former lecturer of mine once said, if you're wrong on your presuppositions, you can be wrong all the way down the line. The travellers in verse 21, it says, had wrongly assumed and had hoped that Jesus was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Their view of reality, though, was a distorted view, and Jesus had to correct them. It wasn't a political redemption, but a spiritual redemption that the cross was addressing here. And there was a need to correct their thinking. So the text says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. But there's a third lesson in this story that I don't want you to miss. You and I can talk as much as we want to. We can even have all the right inputs, but nothing changes unless something else happens, and that is the exercise of free choice. The Reverend William Barclay, the Scottish theologian, says of this passage, Jesus made as if he would have gone on. He would not force himself upon them. He awaited their invitation to come in to their home. He says God gives us the gift of our free will, and we can either use it to invite Christ to enter our hearts or allow him to pass by. The travellers, for whatever reason, chose to let Jesus enter into their world, and it was at that point that things began to change for them. And when Jesus broke bread with them, they became fully aware of whose presence they were in. Perhaps it was the symbolism that flashed them back to where they witnessed a week earlier, what they witnessed a week earlier at the Last Supper. Perhaps they noticed the wounds in Jesus' hands. Perhaps everything just suddenly made sense in that moment. The two travellers then raced back to Jerusalem to give an update on all that they had discovered. Now, they were a motley bunch back there in Jerusalem. Peter, of course, you remember, had denied Christ the previous week, but somehow found his way back to the fold. Thomas, who was full of his own doubts, was there too. And of course, their former colleague, Judas, had topped himself and was no longer around. But I guess Lazarus, Zacchaeus, Nicodemus, the centurion soldier, Joseph of Arimathea, who supplied the burial tomb, were all there. Probably the woman caught in adultery and the Samaritan woman who went and told her friends to come and see a man who had told me everything I ever done. Perhaps they were there. The healed paralytic, and I suppose many, many more who had chosen to follow Jesus were there at that time. Perhaps even Saul was looking on quietly in the background, sussing things out and wondering what it all meant. The resurrection now, there was hardly a secret. People couldn't contain themselves. There was a buzz in the air, and everyone wanted to be a part of this new moment. Something had happened. The mood had shifted. The penny had dropped. The news had gotten around, and something exciting was taking place, and people wanted to be a part of the action. Let me ask you, did people understand the full implications of what had happened over the past few days? Well, like us, probably not. Did they have a handle on all the why-fors and the what-fors? Again, like us, I doubt it. That's why Jesus went on to spend the next 40 days clarifying things, helping the people to make sense of what had happened, like he had done earlier with the two travellers. I think everyone knew, though, back then, that if our journey doesn't end up at the cross and the open tomb, we'll find ourselves on a dead-end track and lost. We can be walking through the darkest of valleys. We can have all the right information at our fingertips, but if we don't freely invite the Lord into our home, then he will pass us by. He doesn't force himself on anyone. He just knocks on our door, as it were, and if we choose to ignore him, he will pass on by. And as you track your own Emmaus journey, I encourage you to let Jesus into your world. As the old kids' song says, into my heart, come into my heart, Lord Jesus, come in today, come in to stay, come into my heart, Lord Jesus. It's the place where our despair turns to optimism, where the bleak turns to blue skies, where our gloomy turns to gladness, where God begins to light that fire in our life. Now, I trust that you've enjoyed this pastoral conversation today. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to chatting with you another time. Bye.